I was a little girl, I would pretend I was a princess, trapped in the tower, and then this knight on a white horse would come charging up.
Prostitution, the world's oldest profession. The selling of oneself in exchange for sexual favors, prostitution has been on this planet for thousands of years. In some cultures, the act was accepted, even encouraged. But as time went on, prostitution would become one of the most taboo and cast-out factions of society. Governments have banned it, cultures have damned it. But what is it about prostitution that is so controversial? How has contemporary America been impacted by prostitution? Are 21st century people changing their minds about it? And finally, what would happen if America suddenly legalized the act? All these questions will be answered and more in Prostitution, a Controversy. Known as the oldest profession, prostitution has been around as early as 2400 BC, when the first historians in ancient Mesopotamia began documenting women being sold for sex. The ancient Greeks commonly kept brothels available, selling either women or adolescent males as prostitutes. The brothels were legal, and for many parts of the world, prostitution was allowed.
Instead of being a proper Roman city, these people are up to is a seething world of sex and filth and squalor.
New evidence of widespread prostitution, orgies and sex clubs. Women selling themselves to men, men to other men, and men to women.
In America, prostitution bustled in the early times of the Republic. In 1831, it was estimated 4% of New York residents worked as prostitutes. By 1910, 1 out of every 50 women were being paid for sex. Yet in the same year, the government passed the Mann Act, banning prostitution or any other immoral sexual acts. But by 1955, prostitution was back on the market. In 1955, the Moonlight Bunny Ranch opened in Nevada and remains one of the most famous brothels to date. About 20 years later, Nevada legalized the licensing of brothels. Today, there are about 30 brothels throughout the state. Some countries have gone so far as to legalize prostitution altogether. As long as the sex is a legal contract, women are of age and obtain a working permit, the sex market is legal in the Netherlands, Germany, Taiwan, and New Zealand. In the United States, prostitution, for the most part, is illegal. This has become its challenge, as prostitution has greatly evolved. While the street corner prostitute is still an image fixed in the American psyche, many hookers are moving on to different locations to attract clients. With the boom of the internet, a majority of prostitutes are getting customers through personal websites, ads and other sites, or through call girl services. Yet it is a booming underground economy. $14.5 billion was spent on prostitution last year alone, while the government spent $23 million attempting to enforce it. In America today, the debate about prostitution seems to be put on the back burner. But when it is discussed, a key component to the debate is how much control the government should have over a person's body. Many people argue that abortion is legal because women deserve privacy to do what they want with their bodies. Some relate this concept to the legalization of prostitution. The thought process is that women and men have the right to do what they choose with their body, and selling it for sex should not be limited. On December 17, 2008, a national march for sex workers' rights was organized in Washington, D.C. But many fear that with the legalization of prostitution comes an array of moral issues. Should people be allowed to sell something that many people, mostly religiously, reserve for marriage? On the other hand, should religious morals play any part in our lawmaking?
Do you think prostitution should be legal in the United States?
I think it should be legal because then it's safer and more regulated.
Yeah, just think that the government should play a part in making sure that it happens in a safe manner.
Do you think prostitution should be legal in the United States?
No, I do not think it should be legal.
So how would America change if prostitution was legal?
I think America would change for the worse.
Many Americans do not find prostitution to be a savory or morally upright practice, but they also don't want the government interfering with their rights. Yet, if prostitution remains legal, current laws could increase in volume. Many states are moving to make the practice totally illegal. In fact, Rhode Island recently made indoor prostitution a felony, which had been legal in the 1980s. To deter prostitution, the government has created harsh penalties for providing, receiving, or selling human services. Under federal law, Title 25, Chapter 34, Section 3207, engaging in prostitution is a reason to deny employment. But what would happen if prostitution was legalized?
Why should we legalize it?
Well, the laws as they are now, and let's just get away from the sensationalistic horror movies, okay? In real life, what happens is the laws prevent working women who are trying to make an independent living from reporting crimes to the police, make us very vulnerable to assault, rape, theft, and even murder. If prostitution were legal and were treated like other jobs, if the management in prostitution were treated like management in other industries, we would have a much better situation for everybody.
Just as many other illegal acts, prostitution will happen whether the government allows it to or not. Therefore, legalizing prostitution will create a much safer environment for the workers. If prostitution were legal, it could be monitored more carefully, which means the exploitation and abuse of sex workers could decrease dramatically. Decriminalization could better protect people in the sex industry from violence and abuse. Legalizing prostitution will, rather obviously, clear up many nonviolent offenders from already overcrowded prisons. On top of that, it is estimated that if prostitution were legalized in the United States, the rape rate would decrease by roughly 25%, for a decrease of approximately 25,000 rapes per year. Prostitution could do damage to their reputation as a nation. Other nations might view this as immoral, which would give them a negative connotation to the United States. And some have argued that legalizing prostitution might also lead to the increase of sexually transmitted disease. But in fact, a recent study done by the World Health Organization at the United Nations found that the Netherlands, where prostitution is for the most part legal, has a lower STD rate than any other country in the world, even the United States. The divorce rate in America is currently over 60%. Legalized prostitution gives a social incentive for promiscuity, which could raise the divorce rate in cases of infidelity. Many see this, then, as a huge downgrading of the family, which, for many Americans, is the cornerstone to American society and life. Yet perhaps the most enticing argument for the legalization of prostitution is its improvements on the American economy. Government would be able to regulate and tax the act, bringing in revenue, but at the same time, prostitution could become its own facet of the private sector. Prostitutes would suddenly be independent of pimps, and with the market forces of basic economics, become their own bosses. They would have the ability to unionize, demand fair wages, even demand health care from their employers, which would fall under the 2010 Affordable Care Act. The legalization of prostitution would also create jobs. As the Keynesian multiplier rule states, one primary job creates an additional 5 secondary jobs. This figure makes sense in practice, and it could ripple into the economy as a job creator for many women and men if they so choose, dropping the unemployment rate and stimulating further tax income revenue from the government. Prostitution, of course, is still mostly a taboo subject. When many people think of prostitution, they may picture shady black alleys with men parked in cars, yet prostitution has been on this earth almost as long as human beings have been here, and it's hard to argue it will be going away anytime soon. The only question left to answer is, what happens next?